Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to today's panel. Nothing big here. We're just going to be talking about the entire future of the music business, and we're looking forward to what is hopefully going to be really good, exciting conversation. And got some really good fellow panelists with me here. And what I'm going to do is we're going to go around and introduce ourselves. So I'm going to start with myself. I'm Mark Mulligan. I'm a music industry analyst. I've been analysing the music and tech for far too many years to mention now. Back in the deep dark past, I used to be a recording artist myself as well. And really the sort of things which we look at with the company I'm from, media, is really all the ways in which technology is affecting music, everything from the business through to the artists, etc. So that's me, Hazel.
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me, Mark. I'm Hazel Savage. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Museo, which I describe as an artificial intelligence company for the music industry. I've been working in the music industry for about 15 years. So I started at HMV, Shazam. I've worked at Pandora, Universal Music. So a bit of a skew towards the tech music side with me. And Museo is my own company that I started 2.5 years ago. So yeah, delighted to be here.
Brilliant, thanks. Jim.
Hey everybody, my name is Jim Turk. I'm the Director of Business Development for Reverb.com. Reverb is a marketplace website for buying, selling, and discovering music gear. We're a global company, so retailers, private sellers, artists all buy and sell through the platform that we've fostered and the community that we've fostered. I spend the majority of my time working with manufacturers and retailers and artists to find, strategic and cool partnerships that are mutually beneficial to everybody involved. As with you both, in a previous life, I was touring a lot more. I was playing a lot more music, recording a lot more. I used to manage a record label for a really great trumpet player out in New York City. So I've been in the music business probably, since I was 18, but I've been playing music since I was 5 years old. This has been my life, and absolutely love it. I'm just super excited to talk about the future of it because there's so many things that are changing and so many things to be excited about.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks, Jim. Thanks, Hazel. And for you, the audience, you should realise there is a 13-hour time difference between Jim and Hazel at opposite ends of the day as we do this. Okay, so media research company I'm from, one of the things that we've done a bunch of over the last sort of 4 or 5 months is a lot of work looking at how COVID and lockdown has changed the music business. So one of the things we've done is we filled a lot of surveys to consumers, asking them about what they've been doing differently, and also looking forward, as we're moving into, unfortunately, a recession, how do people think they're going to change their spending, etc. So I think this, it seems that we've seen a lot of changes in the way that consumers are spending their money. I think one of the really big interesting things was, you add together the amount of money that Live Nation lost and Disney lost in Q2 2020 compared to Q2 2019. That was about $10 billion. Okay. At the same time, Home Depot increased its revenues by $7 billion. So people weren't going out to theme parks or gigs anymore. They were going and fixing that bathroom they'd always meant to do. So we've seen lots of people taking their money elsewhere. And at the same time, artists have been thinking, well, okay, I can't play live anymore. So, how do I stay connected with my audience? There's a bunch of live streams. You've got some stuff happening in games. Lots of smaller artists have been releasing more music. More artists have been buying more kit, learning how to produce, buying sound packs, etc. So it feels like COVID is almost like doing this, for all of the horrific things that it is as a pandemic, it's had this sort of silver lining to the cloud, where it's created this catalyst for, for particularly smaller independent artists to really start doing more, making more music, learning how to do more stuff. And so what I'm really interested in, both in terms of positive and negative, how do we think COVID has changed the music business, and how many of those things are going to stay with us as long-term legacies? I'll start with you, Jim. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I obviously, first and foremost, like you mentioned, COVID is a humanitarian crisis, that has affected millions and millions of people. So, I always like to say that before we start talking about kind of one of the rosier aspects of COVID, which is that this shift to e-commerce and the kind of boom, at least in the music instrument industry, as well as, other industries too. in April, retailers were closed, right? Grocery stores were closed, venues were closed. And, it's no secret that, people have been shifting to buying online over the last couple decades, right? I mean, that's an obvious, right? But what COVID did is it sped up that volume, right? It made it so that there was no other choice but to buy online. And so in my world, in e-commerce platforms like Reverb, we were one of the solutions to the challenge, right? And so starting in April, when all these places were closed, if you were a retailer and you didn't have an e-commerce strategy, you were probably working overtime trying to figure out how to get one, right? Because the people that did have one, that had a strong e-commerce presence, were killing it. They were struggling to just keep up with demand and try to keep their warehouse open and shipping. This was, and that's on the seller side. On the buyer side, we're talking about artists. I think that there are two cohorts to mention that we took notice of specifically for this conversation. I think that they're relevant. One, the professional or semi-professional musician. Right? These are people like you mentioned, Mark. They don't have any gigs, right? They can't go on tour. They end up at home. How do you make music at home? You have to use either your computer or some sort of recording device. If you don't have one, where you go? You go online, you buy a recording device. So because of that, we saw an incredible, when we look at search volume as a leading indicator for intent, search volume for interfaces, microphones, tabletop synthesizers, things like that were through the roof. Anecdotally, I have a lot of artist friends, I'm sitting in a studio with a lot of gear that I actually purchased in April because I needed it because I didn't have my practice space anymore. I didn't feel safe going in there with my friends. So that's kind of one of the cohorts. The other cohort that was interesting is kind of a twofold. One, you have the people that, were working from home. They also need an audio interface and a microphone to teleconference, right? So we saw an increase of people that we would consider to be new buyers. We've never seen these people before. We have no transaction history or anything like that. The cool thing about them is that there's also, you mentioned Disney and other companies like that. In a way, every industry is competing for the same thing: people's time, people's attention, right? And I think that there were a lot of people that mid-April, end of April, were maybe a little sick of season 7 of whatever was on Netflix and thought to themselves, I used to play the clarinet, or I've always wanted to learn how to play piano, or I've always wanted to buy an acoustic guitar, right? And so because of that, we saw an incredible influx of buyers of low-end, low-cost acoustic guitars, again, small tabletop synths, things like that, which ukuleles was another big one. So music is entertainment. And as a creator, Hazel, I'm sure you'll agree, creating is like the ultimate in terms of entertainment, right? That's like probably what we get the most, at least me, that's what I get the most gratification out. So I'm excited to watch that cohort kind of perform over time and how well people like Reverb or companies like Reverb can re-engage with them over time.
Yeah, I think the attention bit is crucial. So we're media talk a lot about having reached peak in the attention economy. There are only so many hours in the day. And one of my favorite stats of the digital era was the Swedish National Statistical Office did a media cannibalization study. Sounds dead boring, right? But wait for the punchline. So they looked at the thing which was most cannibalized by digital entertainment: staring out of the window. And it's just that time when we didn't have stuff to do, we now have stuff to do. We sat waiting for a bus or a train. We're on our phone. We fill that time. So the last sort of up to maybe a year and a half ago, every time someone grew, when Facebook got new users and Snapchat got bigger, this was all new time that was being put in. Now it's a zero sum. If you're spending some time learning the ukulele, you're spending exactly like you say, less time watching that season 7 on Netflix. And I think that's a really exciting bit about sort of opening up lots of creativity. We're going to be spending more time at home because fewer of us are going to be commuting as a long-term legacy, let alone where we are now. So Hazel, what do you think about this? If more people have got more time to make and to listen to music,
yeah.
What does that look like post-lockdown, do you think?
Well, I got to say, first of all, I'm in the COVID e-commerce statistics because I picked up this new Vox less than a month ago. So I was like, yeah, I got a mini Marshall stack, but I like the look of this Vox. Why not treat myself? I'm not going anywhere. So I'm right in there on those statistics. But what I can also tell you is in regards to like how my business was affected by COVID. And I don't know about anyone else, but I kept kind of quiet for like the first 6 months of the year, because, you know, when the whole live industry was being decimated, and a lot of my friends work in live and events and are professional musicians, the last thing you want to do is be like, well, I'm okay. You know, that's not the great response people want to hear. But I think because Musio, as an artificial intelligence, we only operate on recorded music. So we work with streaming services to analyze their audio. We work with record labels on their back catalog. We work with user-generated platforms to tag their music or to search their music. And a lot like everything else, a lot of the UGC platforms, you know, that we work with, they were maybe tagging 10,000 tracks a day with our technology pre-COVID, and now it's like 20,000 a day. And we've seen like 50 to 100% increase in kind of user-generated music being uploaded to the bigger platforms where you would expect to see user-generated music uploaded. And so what we did notice though as well, more specifically, was my sales team is 3 people, and I'm one of them. And we used to split deals up into like kind of like a little triangle. And I was at the top of the triangle, and I handle like enterprise, like commercial, blue chip, whatever. And then we had like a mid-tier guy who would do like the SMEs, the indies. And then we had like a sole trader guy who would do the independent musicians, like independent artist managers. And what we found was like the minute that COVID happened, the bottom 2 chunks of the triangle vanished. Everyone from SME downwards went, we ain't spending a single penny until we know what the heck is going on. But what we also found was that the top of the triangle, the enterprises, the guys with the most money went, we're going to double down, and we're going to overinvest in this technology, and we're going to spend as much money as possible. Like the old saying, you know, every challenge is an opportunity for these guys. So what I can't tell you for definite as a company that's only 2.5 years old is, would this have just happened anyway? Is my perfect customer really the enterprise? And therefore, eventually I would have figured that out, and it would have just taken maybe 12 to 24 months. Or will that market segment come back post-COVID, you know, when the independent labels decide they want to turn the taps on a little bit more with the revenue? So I've definitely seen that pattern, and we had to work very quickly to realign our sales team to meet the increased demand in the top segment, and then not have 2 sales guys with no audience. But, you know, we do sort of remain grateful that we're in the recorded music space, and therefore, as a company, has still been able to kind of grow during COVID. And, you know, I was in the US 6 times last year. I was in the UK 5 times. Like, I do miss the travel. I miss the networking, the face-to-face. Don't miss the jet lag. But, you know, yeah, on balance, I would be quite keen to get on an aeroplane again, I would say.
Right. Jim, one of the things you touched upon, which you know, is potentially something that's going to go on for, you know, a number of years, is the impact of live. So we're seeing, you know, if you're a massive, big live company, you know, whether you're a venue, promoter, agency, or a combination of all the above, you can do things like afford bridge financing and the sort of things which are going to get you through. You know, you can tap up some rich Saudi fund and you can get yourself through the period. But if you're a small venue, not only, you know, if you're like a club-sized venue, not only can you not actually do social distancing in, you know, it's like a 100-cap venue, you can't make the economics add up, you know, even if you could. A lot of these companies, you know, there's some government grants in some countries, etc., but it really looks like a lot of small venues won't make it through the recession. You know, so we could have this sort of gaping hole, and I'm wondering, you know, what is this going to do for the next generation of emerging artists? Because we've already got this thing happening. So, you know, you talk about all of these sort of sales of, you know, people learning to produce at home, etc. And we've already seen this shift pre-COVID where people were doing much more production. You know, more people were using, you know, various online tools and DAWs and all the other sort of things to, you know, learn how to produce. And they were making music, and maybe they suddenly get a whole bunch of streams on Spotify, and they suddenly look really big. But they haven't done the touring up and down the country in a beaten up old van, learning how to play to some dismal, empty venue on a cold Tuesday night. And so when they actually go and tour, they feel like a much inferior artist to what their streaming and the recorded looks like. So if that was already happening, what's that going to be like when there's no venues or very few venues for artists to get started with? You know, so I guess there's two bits to that question. from an artist perspective, what are they going to do to fill that gap? And two, what is the long-term impact going to be on this new generation of artists coming through now who might never get that first rung on the live ladder?
Yeah, it's so interesting. You know, I just got to think back, you know, to my early 20s of being a road warrior, you know, living in a van, you know, people think that touring is really glamorous, but it's actually just a lot of waiting. You know, you wait for sound.
I have to say, when Mark mentioned the empty room with 2 people in a really terrible pub, I was like, oh, I see you've been to one of my shows.
Right, all of us, right? I mean, that's part of yeah, I was going to say that's part of what it is to be an artist, but I think to your point, Mark, I think that that's rapidly changing, right? You know, to my point about, you know, e-commerce kind of being, April coming and e-commerce really being that solution. You know, people have said, you know, well, it's the straw that broke the camel's back. And what I say to that is it's really like an anvil that came from the sky and crushed the camel, right? I think in the same way, COVID's doing the same thing to your point in the live venue space. Now, I don't know too much about it, right? But like what I do see has also been a gradual shift. And I just think about artists, you know, that work with manufacturers in the music gear industry in terms of like signature gear, right? So like a lot of, you know, you have the Eric Claptons and the, you know, David Gilmours and the other old white dudes, you know, that play guitar, you know, that, you know, are the classic on stage, you know, rock stars. The rock stars now live on Instagram and on YouTube, right? There's already been a shift away from what it is to be an artist on stage versus where the stage is. The stage is a global stage now. So I think that shift has already happened. I think that people are going to continue to invest in it. One of the other companies that I'm looking at is a company called Patreon that a lot of my artist friends are actually working to connect with their fans in a much more direct way. And again, another trend that we've been seeing since the dawn of the web and the music industry starting to kind of take a little bit more cues from it. You know, this idea of crowdfunding, crowdsourcing. You know, people think of Kickstarter and throwing money down, and that's not really where it ends, right? It is about that connection point that an artist can have. There, in a lot of ways, the barrier between the audience and the stage has been torn down, right? Now it's not playing to 2 people in a dank, dark pub. It's you're playing to 20 people that are around the world that are super engaged with what you're doing. And I think that presents a really interesting opportunity. While not the same experience that I had, it's certainly not lesser than what I had. It's just different, right?
So one of the things which we'll probably be talking about streaming quite a lot through the rest of this panel, because it has become even more important now since the decline of live. But before all those venues closed, streaming had this really positive symbiotic relationship with live, which is, in the old days, if you're a small indie artist and you sold 20,000 units of your album, that means 20,000 people have heard your music. Yeah, you got a chunk of money, but only 20,000 people had heard your music. Now, if you've got 500,000 people streaming, you're making less money than, you know, for 20,000 people buying the album, but you've got 500,000 people who are now the people who might go and see you play live and buy your merch and everything else. So streaming almost acted as this paid for, you know, marketing. You got paid for this platform that made you more famous, that gave you a bigger audience. And that all worked until it didn't, you know, and then live suddenly stopped, and suddenly artists are looking at their streaming royalties and saying, well, hang on, you know, you've got this whole broken record debate. How can millions of streams only equal thousands of dollars, etc.? And there's 1,000,001 reasons why that is the case. But I think there's a basic philosophical one, which is streaming is more like having an annuity that, you know, sort of matures over a period of time. Unfortunately, it's hard to tell your landlord that you want your rent to be treated like an annuity and spread over a period of time. So artists are trying to work out how to make streaming add up. And this was sort of interesting that you work so closely, you know, so deeply in streaming, Hazel. Do you think there are ways in which the streaming model can change, both now to try to work out with this unique moment we've got, whether that's closer integration with things like Patreon or whatever it might be, and are there longer term things as well that can change too?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously I used to work at Pandora, and so I will caveat that with, you know, understanding the difference between like on demand and lean back. So lean back being more comparable to radio and paying different rates to on demand, you know, and I sort of have some probably conflicting views that I don't have a resolution for, which is I totally see lean back services like Pandora, like internet radio, as that great marketing tool. You say like they pay artists, but essentially it's how you build your audience up to, and this is what we used to say when I worked at Pandora, right? You get 1 million streams on Pandora, you get X amount of money. You get played once on the radio to the same million people, you get less. So that was kind of how we stacked it up. I think on demand is maybe slightly more problematic in that that is replacing, instead of radio, that's replacing retail like cassette, vinyl, CD. And for the artist, those numbers, like you say, they don't stack up. It's difficult to make a living with that being the predominant way your music is consumed. But then on the flip side, I know that, I don't know if these numbers are still true, but Spotify are paying like what, 70% of all of their revenue back out to artists, which is barely sustainable as a business. And I think they've maybe had like one profitable year ever. So we're at an impasse here where I want artists to get paid more, but it can't come from the current pot of money because they're not a sustainable business for Spotify. So I'm kind of at a little bit of an impasse there in terms of what I think. I do think, like, I've just recently started getting into like high fidelity streaming. And I've, you know, and that's something I'm willing to pay a premium for. I also, you know, as a huge consumer of music myself, like one of my, I'm already buying tickets to gigs at the end of 2021. You know, I'm putting my money there. If somebody does like a Patreon or a Kickstarter, I'm there paying $200 for some handwritten lyrics. Like that's the fan I want to be, and that's what means the most to me. So can it still be? I mean, it was always part of a holistic behavior. It was just that live was a big part of that. Can we make it still a holistic way to earn a living, and streaming is just part of the equation? I think that's probably the most likely outcome.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to throw in real quick, you know, we talk a lot about streaming in terms of Spotify, Pandora, radio, things like that. I mean, what about live streaming? You know, I see tons of artists jumping in and either doing YouTube Live, Facebook Live, trying to figure out ways. I'm sure that there are platforms out there that are jumping in all over this. I have a few friends that are in music or video production that also work with venues here in Chicago, you know, that are trying to work with those touring and local musicians to say, okay, well, you can't do a show to 300 people at Lincoln Hall, for example, or Empty Bottle, but we can bring in a 5-person film crew and either pre-record it or record it live and then put it out there. I mean, do we think that is a revenue opportunity if the technology can meet the demand for the consumer? Because the consumers are online. You know, a smarter person than myself once said, you know, if you follow the consumer and you meet them where they are, you're gonna have a successful business. Everybody's online. So it's just about how good the technology is to reach those people and engage with them where they're at.
So
I think as well, like, oh, sorry, go ahead, Mark.
Go ahead. Okay.
Well, I was just going to say the other thing to add to that part of the conversation. I read a really fascinating report about COVID behavior. It could have even been something you wrote, Mark, to be honest. If I'm quoting you, do tell me. But that essentially all COVID behavior falls into 3 categories. There's the stuff that will go back the way it was immediately the minute that that's possible. You know, so for example, when pubs are shut for 3 months, no one gets to the end of the 3 months and goes, oh, I think I could live without pubs now. Everyone is straight back to the pub having a beer, me included. And then there's the stuff that, you know, is kind of a half-half, right? And working from home falls into that category. So people are now looking at it going, oh, 5 days a week in the office? It's actually better when I don't have to commute. But actually, it's not perfect because I have less connection. So maybe the solution is like an interim. It's like 2 or 3 days a week from the office, 2 or 3 days working from home. And then there's the stuff that will never go back. The stuff like, if you use a lawyer currently and you had to print out the contract and sign it with a pen and scan it and fax it back to them, and they've been reluctant to use e-sign for years, and now they have e-sign, that genie's not going back in the bottle. So I try to think about like live concerts and where they will fall. And to me, they're in the first category. The minute I'm allowed to go to a concert, I will be straight back there. And I hope that that's a positive thing for sort of post-COVID.
So I think we've actually done some work asking people about what will you do post lockdown, and the picture is a bit mixed. So what you've got is people who are older tend to be much more reluctant to go back to concerts. So people, it's like from like 50 or so onwards because of high health risk. So, every 4 years extra after the age of 40, your risk of complications doubles. And if you think about it, one of at the top end of live music, it's done a really good job over the last 10 years of getting older people to spend more money going to concerts to pretend they're young again. And, and that I think is a really, and in some ways you've almost got this pincer movement, right? If we've said that the smaller venues are not going to be there because they can't survive. So you've got all these young people wanting to go and see young, small emerging acts, don't have a place to go and watch them. And then the older consumers aren't going to be filling up the now sort of socially distant stadiums because they're scared of going out. So I think there is absolutely a massive hardcore of music fans who will jump to the first time that they can get out there. But I don't think of this as being an either or. The things Jim's talking about. I think this is a case of we've got an opportunity to try throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks and work out some things that can live permanently alongside live. So I really like the idea, Jim, where you're saying the stage has moved. Well, I think there can be multiple stages, and and if we work out a way to properly professionalize and commercialize, live streaming. So the irony is live is where most artists, established artists, make the majority of their income. Yet live streaming is this thing you just give away to everyone. Live music is something that's scarce. You have to wait till your favorite actors come into your town so you can go to see them. And if you're really lucky, they might play 2 nights, but they're probably only going to play 1 night. Live streaming is all around the world all the time, so you can watch your favorite artists again and again and again, and suddenly it's not scarce. So I think things like geofencing and paid events, etc. But why I sort of see what live streaming could be is it could be for live music what TV has been for sports. It opens up this completely new way, which is that it's something that exists alongside, as well as the majority of people who watch English Premier League football will never go to a stadium. Doesn't stop them being fans, doesn't stop them spending money, it doesn't stop them buying t-shirts, tops and all those sorts of things. So I think there's a huge amount of great opportunity there. But the bit I'm interested in is the next stage of the conversation is, we've got all these changes we're talking about. Streaming continues to get bigger. It's still not quite fixed in terms of, the artist income. We've got loads of things about potentially monetizing fandom, which you touched upon, Hazel, which the music industry just doesn't do a great job of anymore. It's great irony that people go out and buy vinyl as a way of showing how much they like an artist. Well, yeah, you're forcing somebody to buy a product that's been around for nearly a century. Well, shouldn't there be something new that you can go, buy and say, if you're a kid playing Fortnite, you've got loads of ways to buy things to say who you are, which are completely digital and, completely virtual. So what does it mean to be an artist for the next 5 years, right? So if you're an artist coming into this, just getting yourself going, you don't necessarily need a label. If you do have a label, you can choose what type of deal you have. You've got all of these different platforms where you can engage with fans. You can be successful small as well as being successful big. So I'll start with you, Jim. I know it's a how long is a piece of string question, but what does it mean to be an artist over the next 5 years, and how's that different from the last 5 years?
Well, and when I was thinking about this, obviously, I always got to divert back to what the gear is telling us, right? What the data that we're seeing on Reverb can help to inform that. And I think that a lot of what you were just mentioning there, Mark, is about this idea of the democratization of music distribution, right? It's been going on for a couple decades now. It's certainly changed a whole lot. There's also been a democratization of music technology in how artists are creating that music, right? So even thinking about how you're recording, you go into the studio, all the way through the 90s. I mean, even today, I have a studio session on the 16th of October, with a friend, to record some drums, but it was really expensive to buy studio grade gear. It still is, when you talk about getting a 50s Neumann U47 or U87 or an RCA 77, these are expensive tools, and, they're still around. But I think that one of the interesting things that's happened over the last, say, 20 years or so is that you can get really great audio quality with tools that are considered budget or beginner. It's pretty astonishing what you can do with a $99 microphone. And setting aside that, one of the most powerful instruments that you have is something that everybody already has. You can record a voice memo. If there's a beat making app, there's a touch screen to play piano or strum a guitar. I think about something like that as the kind of the gateway, right? Again, back to what I was saying before, it's like kind of the gateway into that next step of getting integrated with hardware instruments in the creative process. So, we see, artists like, Billie Eilish. I mean, they made a record in, his basement, right? Her bedroom or whatever. And it's an incredible record. It sounds amazing. It sounds like it was done in a multi-billion-dollar studio, right? But it was done in the box, right? So, I think that the creative process is certainly changing and the gear around it is changing, but in a really kind of positive way, because people have access to so many amazing tools that don't have this high barrier of entry, right? So I'm really excited about that. And I think that, there's been also a lot, this kind of like death of the guitar, death of rock music, death of live, death of all this stuff. And like I said before, I just feel like it's shifting. We haven't seen any sort of death in guitar. Guitars are really popular right now, not only with older folks like myself, but with young kids and young adults. They see people on Instagram playing guitar. They want to play that. They might not, again, be looking at the stage in terms of this huge rock star persona. They're looking at someone who's publishing twice a day on Instagram for their inspiration, and people are engaging with that. So I see music and music creation constantly changing, and right now, probably more than ever, there is a shift more towards in the box on the computer, but we're still seeing tons of different disparate types of music being created.
So just before I get Hazel's thoughts, so just one follow-up question there for you, Jim. So you're talking about these two things happening simultaneously. People are buying guitars still en masse, but they're also buying production tech as well, and using DAWs and whatever else. How much do you think now a guitarist has to spend as much time learning how to make garage band work as they do learning riffs?
That's a great question. Great question. Have you ever seen those like old photos of like Ray Charles in the studio, and he's surrounded by an orchestra and he's playing the piano? In those days, you had to be on. You were being recorded and you needed to be one take. And if you weren't one take, you were wasting somebody's time because, Sinatra was coming in the afternoon, Ray, or whatever, you know what I mean? So much different process then as it is today. So I think it's absolutely paramount if you are a writer or if you are a collaborator to understand the tools in your tool belt, or to even have a tool belt, right? The days of going in and playing guitar on a jingle are, I'm sure that there are still opportunities out there to play guitar on jingles. I just don't know any of them. I know a lot of opportunities to collaborate with people, through the internet, whether it's through, some sort of file sharing collaboration tool or whatever. I think that how you record, how you can get the sound that fits into a recording is just as important, if not more important nowadays, than being able to be a technical virtuosic player. It's not about certainly there are certain types of music where it's still applicable, but I spend the majority of my time. When I was a kid, all I wanted to do was learn Metallica riffs. I want to learn Iron Maiden riffs. I want to learn how to play as fast as I possibly could and be as precise as I possibly could on guitar. Now, I'm trying to figure out how to be the best, to fit best within whatever context I'm playing in, right? Which is a totally different skill, right? Creating vibe rather than creating, rather than showing off your chops. And a lot of that is how you are capturing that performance, whether a microphone or through the box, a plug-in, a pedal, or anything like that. And understanding those tools is paramount moving forward, for sure.
If Radiohead were writing the song "Anyone Can Play Guitar Now," maybe anyone can mix a track.
Yeah, absolutely.
But Hazel, so the flip side of this equation of what it means to be an artist. So we've looked a lot into the creativity. What do you think about the actual business of being an artist is going to change? What are the sort of the key things in terms of how artists get paid, but also the places where they make money? What do you think are going to be the big changes?
I just kind of wanted to build a little bit on what Jim said there, which, you know, and again, I appreciate this is anecdotal, but as a company, Museo, we currently have 3 interns, and they're all music interns, and we use music interns for like curation, for data sets, for, you know, QAing our own product, and all 3 of them are studying computer science at one of the universities here in Singapore. And what I really think we're seeing right here, right now on this call, is the last generation of musicians who can't code. Because like it's a huge rarity now. It's a huge rarity in my company that someone is, I'm either a music person or I'm a tech person. Like you can't make that distinction anymore. And I think you just have to look back to like last year or the year before when Lil Nas X bought his beat from, you know, BeatStars, did his thing over the top, uploaded it via Muse, which is like a free distribution platform. Boom, you've got the next biggest hit, right? And I think we'll see more and more of those type of artists who they want to, like you say, it's fitting with the vibe. It's not who's perfect, because you can buy a beat from here, you can drop it into a DAW, you can upload it via a distro service, you can run your own social media campaign on Twitter and Instagram. And those, I think, are the stars of the future. And then the way I think about it from a business perspective, it's hard, and I keep doing this, it's hard to not be distracted by COVID and almost feel like the world's on pause, because it's kind of on pause in that I can't travel or fly anywhere. I didn't get to go to South by this year or Medan, but nothing else is on pause, right? So I was on a webinar recently and talking to 6 different music tech startups that launched in 2020. And I was like, there are new companies? I've never heard of any of these. Who are these people? And the same is true of artists. There will be artists right now who are recording, buying beats, doing stuff online. And maybe we're not going to be as exposed to them because everyone's pretty much locked down and there's no travel. But those people don't care. They're just doing it anyway. And that to me is what's exciting. So, you know, as I say, I think there'll be a huge shift towards technical ability and code ability. I think there'll be a sort of a shift towards taking the best of everything and sort of becoming more of a collaborator. And yeah, I think I would just almost agree that it just builds on exactly what Jim was saying.
Yeah. So I think that before we wrap up this little bit, I think there's a really interesting sub-strand here, right? Which is, so we all agree guitars aren't going away. You know, some companies are reporting record ever sales, etc. And you know, rock hasn't died; it's just changing into something else. But we're also all saying that music tech is more important and will be more important than ever before. And artists are going to spend as much time being producers as they are performing artists. Perhaps they're going to spend less time being performing artists because they don't have venues to play in, etc. So I'm just wondering, what does this mean for you know, so the role of music tech in creativity? You know, so there was a big flurry of startups about 2 years ago where, you know, so musicians are going to get replaced by AI, and you know, there's all these sort of generative AI companies, and of course, you know, it's not true, and it turns out to be, you know, on paper it's very easy to write music, but actually, you know, in practice it's really quite difficult to make it convincing. But there have been some really imaginative uses of AI where it might be recommending which beats will go with the beats that you've got at the moment, you know, sort of those sort of tools. So how much do you think tech is going to actually shape how music is made? Not just be in the way that we've spoken about so far, which it's you know, it's maybe we're at this sort of the step change where we're already thinking about how can we make the sound work better because of tech. How much can it go one step beyond where tech is actually shaping where we get to rather than simply being a tool for helping us get there? Who'd like to jump in?
Yeah, it's sometimes these conversations end up sounding like a sci-fi novel, right? You know, like how much can AI shape how much people or how people what people want to consume, right? I always go back to, you know, where is the customer, where is the user, and what are they experiencing? I've always believed, as a marketer, you know, and a sales dude, you know, I've always believed that the one thing that you can't automate away is creativity. Right? If you have a creative thought, you know, computers can't come up with that. They might be able to suggest, but like the brain is more powerful than a computer. I still believe that, and I'm going to hold on to it as long as possible, right? You know, but that said, what people are consuming is going to shape the future, right? If more people are interested in listening to music, you know, over, you know, something that, you know, a rock and roll band, you know, would create, that is going to shift how music is made and what kind of music is being made. And so in that way, I could see consumer behavior really trending and really pushing in that direction. Do I see the consumers doing that? No, I don't. I actually see the opposite. You know, going back to the live venue thing, one of the things that I'm hearing from, like, you know, from the underground people that I know is like, there's going to be a huge boom in DIY spaces, right? If the small venue is going away, people are going back into their basements and they're going to start throwing parties. People want that. They want real, right? You know, we talked about vinyl, right? You know, this medium that's been around for 100 years that people, you know, over the last 20 have rediscovered, right? You know, it never went away. It's just some people are now rediscovering it. I think one of the shifts back to that is that people do want a tactile experience. They don't always want zeros and ones. They don't feel zeros and ones the way that they feel when you drop a needle or whatever. I don't know how much that scales into our culture, or how much the opposite, you know, mindset takes over the coming years. But I definitely still feel that human connection is something that's driving music creativity and what type of music is being created right now, whether it's rock or not, right? Radiohead's a great example, right? Everybody who loved OK Computer hated Kid A, and then the people who loved Kid A didn't like the later stuff, but it's like this perfect kind of shift over the course of a 20-year history where they go from a grunge band to integrating electronics to coding in Max MSP to, you know, where they are now, which is like, what are they going to do next, right? They're a really great use case for a lot of this conversation.
Yeah, and sorry, go ahead, Matt.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I get asked to, obviously my company does AI, so I get asked to sit on a lot of panels with a lot of other AI startup CEOs, and usually I'm the voice of dissent in that we're not a generative AI company. We don't use AI to write music. I personally don't believe anyone wants AI to write music. I must admit, I must have spoken to like every label executive in the world I can get hold of. Not once has anyone ever said, God, we could really use a little bit more of that robot music. And that's because I believe that AI is only truly brilliant when it's replacing either something that's not physically possible to do or something that no one wants to do, right? So, you know, our technology can tag 1 million tracks a day. I used to have a curator who worked for me that did it manually. He topped out at about 200. So obviously there's a huge like manual, like it's not possible to tag 1 million tracks a day manually. But then also, have you ever sat and tagged 1,000 tracks manually? I did, just to try. It was horrible. It was a really awful experience, and it's not enjoyable or creative. And that's what AI should be doing, you know, and then finding opportunities for the artists within there. You know, people always say, well, AI is going to end up writing better music. But, you know, as I say, no one is going to stop writing music. Kids don't stop playing music in their bedroom. Kids don't stop, you know, downloading apps and creating music on their phones. And they do it without being paid, without being told. And so if it's already something that humans want to do, there's no point automating it away. There's no demand. So, you know, I don't see there being a demand for AI music. Maybe where it gets a little bit creepy or a little bit spooky is, imagine if you're going to upload your music to Spotify. I know they've tried being an open distributor and then they shut it down and it's back through the regular pipelines. But imagine if you went to upload it and then Spotify was like, you know, if you put this song in A minor, you'll get like 22% more streams. And then you'd be like, okay, I'll just switch that, you know, hey, if you add an extra middle 8 at the end there, you'll get an extra 7% uplift. Like, and they have the data to be able to do that. So that could be the next iteration. And then will there be a backlash where, you know, people will start in the same way you tag an explicit track, like 100% human grade, like, you know, between versus AI input affected here. So But
That's
yeah.
what I was just thinking. I was just thinking that same thing. It's like, then if that actually ended up happening, you would have, like, instead of parental advisory, explicit lyrics, it was like, partly, machine made, human made, and
Yeah.
people would actually have to figure out which ones that they preferred, right?
Because people are going to want to know what they're consuming, so you have to be upfront with your labeling. So yeah, that could possibly happen, but again, I still don't quite see the demand for it. We're sort of obsessed with as a human beings with the organic nature of it and the almost unknowable factors of what success can look like for music. So, I try to focus on, creating more opportunities for more artists. And yeah, I'm pretty anti-generative AI.
Yeah. So I think the bit which we haven't spoken about, which is the sort of the elephant in the room, we could talk about AI in the creative process, we could talk about artists in the creative process, but fundamentally, how that music gets found shapes stuff, right? So, and you, Hazel, you're talking earlier on about the difference between lean back versus lean forward streaming services. So when Pandora launched, there was a really big difference between what Pandora was versus what Rhapsody was. But now Spotify is all of that in one place. Lean back and lean forward all happens in the same place, and it's more based upon what are you doing at that time. Do you just want a playlist to study to, or whatever else? And that has it. That's had a real impact on some quite cynical ways of making money in music. And it's like, for example, look at how it's changed chill out music. And chill out music, you used to have these big 20-minute long tracks. Well, if you've got a 20-minute long track and you're only getting paid a fraction of a cent per stream, and so they find out, actually, if I have loads of 35-second tracks and I get paid 20 times or 10 times where I've only got paid a couple of times in the past, and then you start seeing playlists. That one big record label created a playlist of storm sounds, and they recorded the storm sounds, and of course there's no artist in the storm sounds, but they get paid exactly the same money as if it was a normal song. And so I think there's lots of us who are really into music. So we're probably, and the people at the conference here and, and us talking, we're not representative of the mass public, right? We're super into our music and we see the world through a music lens. The majority of people who listen to music quite like it. And sometimes they'll quite like it enough to go and pay for a subscription. They'll quite like it enough to go and see a band, a couple of concerts a year or something like that. But most of the time they're listening on the radio, they're leaning back to a playlist, etc. And unfortunately, what streaming does is it makes things optimized. So you find out what's the way that somebody's least likely to skip. Well, guess what? If you don't have a big 1 minute long noodling introduction and you go bang into, the pre-chorus or even open with the chorus, and you make the song 2.5 minutes long and you make sure it does all of these things. So I think we can talk as much as we like about the artists, the streaming services themselves, because they're becoming where everybody's listening to music, where everybody's discovering music. We are not just at the determined by what the streaming services decide themselves. It's what everybody else at record labels and producers and songwriters and everyone else, where they think, what do I need to do to make myself more successful in streaming? So with that slightly dystopian sort of view of the future, that was the way to finish would actually flip it over and try to come up with our big, bright hope. What, for each of us, what do we think could be the most exciting, interesting thing that can make the music business better? It might already be there. It might be just a figment of your imagination that you want to tell the world about. But to give you both a bit, as I've thrown this question upon you, I'm going to give you a chance to think about it by giving my one first. And it's a simple thing, and it touches upon what you were talking on earlier, Hazel, which is streaming does a really good job of monetizing consumption, but it's at risk of making it a bit like a utility. Like you can't do without the water that comes out of your tap in your kitchen, but you don't go down to the pub to talk about how great that water is that comes out of your tap. So there's a risk that we're turning music into this thing that's just there that you turn on. What we want to do is we want to reinvigorate fandom. And at the moment, yeah, you can go see someone play live. Live is there. And you can go and buy some vinyl, but there aren't that many other things you can do. So I think there's a great opportunity to look at what Tencent's done in China, look at what K-pop has done, look at what the idol acts in Japan have done, all these things where you make people go and buy so many more things because it's a way of them saying, this is who I am. Games is created. There are billions and billions of dollars spent every year on in-game purchases, where people are buying skins and emotes and all these things as a way of saying who they are. In the old world, we'd have been walking around with a boombox on our shoulder and a t-shirt, and our hair would have told you exactly who you're into for music. Nowadays, music doesn't play that role as much because there aren't as many ways to do it. So that's my one. Let's work out a way to make fandom work in digital environments in a way that games have already sussed it and music hasn't. Who wants to go next? Hazel, Jim.
All right. Yeah, I'm really struggling to think of a really cutting edge, amazing answer that's going to blow everyone away. So I'll just sort of throw something at the wall and see what sticks. I think the future of the industry is going to head a little bit more down. I'm going to call it the Cardi B model. Because I'm a huge fan of Cardi B. I bought a pair of jogging trousers from her online store yesterday for $60, and just because I think they're amazing, and I am willing to spend money on her. But she also has an OnlyFans account, which, as we all know, is usually for adult content. But she's just, I think I read she's making $90K a month just from subscriptions to her OnlyFans. And so I think smart businesswomen like her and other artists, if they learn how to, a little bit that they're selling themselves as a brand, and that music is part of that. I'm fascinated to see how that expands. Do I think it's the silver bullet, or, you know, the definitive, the way of the future? As I've said, I'm not a representative audience. I'm a super user. Like, I went to a gig the week before lockdown started, Whitesnake and Scorpions in Singapore, great show. But, you know, that's kind of, you know, as the non-super user, how do those guys kind of get into music? And I see that the kind of, the Cardi B model of addressing the younger audience and being on, you know, on their device when they're on the device. I think that's the new way to carve like superstar careers. But I'm going to keep thinking about it because I'm sure I have other ideas after this call.
Yeah.
Okay, Jim.
Hazel, I think you're right on there. You know, one thing real quick before I jump into a platitude, I wanted to just double back, Mark, real quick on, like, you know, this idea that, you know, Spotify or another platform can tell you to not, you know, come right in with the tune rather than have a 2-minute intro or whatever. I think that every generation has always called pop music derivative and said, oh man, we're placating to the lowest common denominator, right? Listen to Motown. I love Motown, right? Motown, 2.5 minute songs, right? Get in, get out, get a middle eight in there, get the cookiest stuff that you can possibly get, and sell as many records as you possibly can. To me, you know, set that next to, you know, a Robert Fripp and Brian Eno collaboration. You know, which one's going to sell better, Mark? You know, like, I think that's already something that's there. And, you know, maybe I'm you know, kind of drilling that down a little bit too easily. But, like, I do think that, like, pop music is always about how many people can get into something immediately, and there's always going to be a drive forward to get the most numbers, because that's how people make it. Whether it's buying 7 inches, a record, or a stream, the idea is to get as many people to engage as possible, and you got to follow the consumer with what they want. In terms of the, you know, where I see the most excitement, where I'm the most excited, I think two things. One, to double on what Hazel was talking about with the Cardi B example. One of the things that I personally worked on at Reverb really, really closely is building this network of artists who want to sell their gear. And it's not just artists who want to sell gear so that they can get some money in their pocket. When you're an artist, and generally speaking, you're making music with tool set. The tool set that you're using now is different than the tool set that you're going to use in 5 years, because you're doing a different creative process. You're doing a different song. Maybe it requires a different sound. And so you end up with this stockpile of gear that you're selling. Now that poses an opportunity, obviously, to monetize and get money, as I mentioned, but also it poses a great opportunity to talk directly to your fans. So whereas in the old days, yes, would a rock star put a guitar on the retailer's wall for 5 times as much as it was actually worth? Sure. The shift now is, let's sell it at fair market value, maybe a little bit of a premium. And now it's like the working man's collectible, right? You can buy, you know, we've worked with Green Day, Foo Fighters, St. Vincent, you know, Alessandro Cortini from Nine Inch Nails sold a bunch of synthesizers that were used on stage with Nine Inch Nails, right? People love that band. I love that band. I bought something from us, you know, like, now I have that piece, and I feel like I own a piece of that band in a way that is completely different than putting a concert poster on the wall or a concert ticket or even a record, right? It is something very, very tangible and very special, right? And so I see a lot of people, you know, similar to what Hazel was talking about, is like, how can you talk to your fan in a different way that maybe you can talk to the super fan who sure is interested in $9.99 for a Spotify, you know, subscription, but more to the point, they might be interested in giving you $999 for something else that you have to offer. So that's number one. Number two, again, going back to kind of where I started, we have more and more people engaging with music creation. Now, whether or not they make records or hit records or upload it to Spotify at all, music creation is at an all-time high. It is one of the, you know, I see companies like Moog, they come out with a really amazing small synthesizer that's really easy to use. Well, maybe not easy to use, but it's like, it's intuitive, right? It's like a video game, but what you get out of it isn't some graphic representation of a war or whatever. It's a sound that you created. And wow, what a feeling that must be for the first time that somebody sits down with an instrument to feel. I mean, I remember when I felt that, right? The first time that you actually create something out of nothing. That is, I think, what's going to be fueling the industry moving forward, is that creativity and how we monetize it. And there's so many different ways, but that music creation spark that people are getting right now is probably the thing I'm most excited about.
Brilliant. Well, let's finish on that high positive note, but the glass not half full is simply overfilling.
I was just trying to look around to see if any of my signed guitars that I've bought, probably from Reverb, were in shop, but I think I've packed them all away. But I'll do private tours later, private tours of my guitar collection.
So, Hazel, Jim, thanks so much for your time, and thanks everybody for listening.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.